Shall I start off so we can get to that lunch a little earlier? Okay with that? Can everyone stand up, please? Everyone stand up? Fantastic. I just wanted to see if I could do that. That's great. We'll all sit down. This picture, by the way, I took when I went with Ivan to Widget Web Expo and Bristol in New York. And that's Times Square. And what struck me about that was that I took a picture of the sign up there, the OMFG. It's quite a striking image. And then when I looked at the picture, I noticed that absolutely no one was looking at it. And that kind of informed quite a lot of my thinking about widgets, both in New York and today. This presentation is going to be a little bit messy. Because I haven't done it before, and the ideas are quite messy, but I hope that leaves some room around the edge for some human interaction, because it's something that I was lucky enough to interview Clay Shirky the other day, and that's one of the things that came out of that. We're talking about brands and interaction, and it's the case that if you make things too perfect, people won't play with them. People won't want to pick up the tools and join in. So this is messy in the hope that maybe you'll want to pick up the tools and join in too. And I'm going to get over some of the kind of science bit early on. But first of all, a picture of a horse at arse. And this is to remind me that we're going to talk about a long tail just a little bit. And in the networked world, and I hope you're all with me when I talk about the networked world, I mean one in which nodes are connecting to each other. I don't mean sort of telephone lines. This is one in which we all get to connect to each other as individuals, and we work out how those connections are made. And in this world, obviously, the hit becomes of less value because of the way the long tail is elongating everything. So I'm going to whiz through that a little bit. And I think there are three laws, well, there are three laws, I don't think they're not my laws. Three laws describe how value grows and is distributed in networks. And the first is Sarnoff's law, which you may be familiar with. That's the red line on this very messy graph, and it's the value of a broadcast network is proportional to the number of viewers, listeners, e.g. Television, radio and cinema. It's the number of sets, the number of broadcast places at which people can receive equates to the value. In Metcalfe's law, our yellow line here, the value of the network is proportional to the square of the number of users of the system, and that's an n squared growth. And so fax machines are the classic model to explain that. This is about one-to-one communication. One fax machine is next to useless. No, hang on, it is useless. A fax machine that can connect to another is a little bit more useful, and a fax machine that can connect to two more is twice as useful, and so on and so forth. And the really interesting one is Reed's law, which is our green line. Reed's law is otherwise known as group forming network theory, is an n squared equation. Sorry, a 2n equation, the right way around. And Dr. David Reed said the value of large networks, particularly social networks, grows exponentially with the size of the network, because the number of possible subgroups of network participants grows much more rapidly than either the number of participants, that's the Sarnoff's law thing, or the number of possible pair connections, the Metcalfe's law. So it's n squared, which means rather frequently one extra node on your network doubles its value. So how does that reveal the value of hits in your network? Well, I just take that messy graph and turn it upside down. You flip the graph and you find what is the demand curve and what is the value of the economics in this. So in a long tail world, the hit end has a much smaller proportional value compared to the whole. So hits take more of the available value in a broadcast world. Little shaded area shows the difference. In the Sarnoff's broadcast world, hits are really important. They take up most of the economic value. In a long tail world, they take up much, much less of the value. So hits are still worth having, but less proportional value compared to the overall economics of the networked world. And in a broadcast world, the hit was where most of the value resided. But the opposite is true in the networked world. So seeking ways to create value in the long tail offers you the bigger opportunity. That's all by way of background, really. Word of caution, I've been doing some research in a number of markets and a number of specialist markets because what I've found is that the long tail is getting longer and longer and longer, much more fragmented. I've found in one particular market that this is an activity that in the UK is one of the most popular activities. I don't want to go into details, but it's a really popular activity, particularly among men, but I won't give you any more clues. And what I've found is that globally, the biggest website for this has 20,000 unique users. Now, this is a thing in which millions and millions of people are involved with in the UK. Now, you can either argue that people who perform this particular activity don't communicate, which would make them the first group of humans in history to be like that, or there's fragmentation going on a massive scale. It's frightening fragmentation. And I think the question remains for those of us who want to reach into that long term. We have to work out ways to go along that journey with them, to be stretched out among the long tail with them, to understand how messages and ideas and conversations evolve in this network world, I think is the key to doing that. So, back to basics, what's the internet for? I think the internet is for people, and it's for people who form groups. That's, at its core, what the internet is for. It's for people to connect to each other, usually around a purpose. And I talk about communities of purpose, people who want to do something together or solve a problem together. That's what the internet's for. Now, the really fascinating thing about it, the change that the internet's wrought, is that it's made it possible for people to form into those groups really, really cheaply. In fact, virtually no cost. And that makes a change to the media model. I think it changes everything. It changes everything from media to economics, to law, to politics, to education. But that's another story. The three key disruptions for us today is who gets to create content, who gets to distribute content, and who controls the user experience. I think the answers are pretty much any and everyone now. It's not in anyone's control. Even the user journey is now beyond our control. The user is their own destination now. They control their own A to anywhere journey. If you think about those guys in Times Square, they're going on their journey, they're not paying attention to the huge banners all around them. So if you're in the journey with them, you have more chance for them to pay attention to you. And one thing we know about these elongating long tails is that they're made up of lots and lots and lots of communities of purpose, lots of small groups of people, and you cannot possibly target them all. But they can. And here's how. I've got this little slide deck that will just demonstrate quite graphically, I think, the distinction between the old way in which you could, for example, get a message to an audience and the way in which the audience gets that message now. And so that was the point of me getting you to stand up. If you wouldn't mind, would you all stand up again? See, I've got one. Okay. Because what I want you to do, I want you to all talk to each other for a moment. And it's difficult while you're sat down because you're in rows. So if you can stand up and find a group of 3 or 4 people, and then ideally I'd like it to be 3 or 4 people, if you can, and have a conversation with them. And if you can find people you're mostly interested in to talk to, please do that too. So, please join me.
How's it going?
Hello! I've been waving at you for minutes. Could you all take the seat again?
No, we don't. You should finish now, though.
I think we might take the point. The reason I wanted just to demonstrate that is that in the old days, I can stand up here broadcasting at you as long as I like. But in the socially connected world we're now in, all these conversations are going on all the time, and you're not paying attention to me anymore. And it's quite difficult for me to get your attention again. I wandered around waving my arms, but I had to come back and shout at the end. And that's one of the differences we're seeing in the way messages are transmitted in social networks for sake of ease, let's say. So, in the old days, you had the stage with me, broadcasting at you, the audience, and scale is where the eyeballs have gone. So everyone thinks all social networks, that's where the audience is, isn't it? So let's go after them. Well, you haven't got audiences in social networks. The message is not arriving because what you've got is a lot of small communities talking to each other. So scale actually equals lots of communities of purpose, and that's where the eyeballs are focused. They're talking to each other, they're not listening to the guy on the stage. Okay, so they share the messages among their own groups, and they adapt those messages to suit their groups, and they make their messages theirs. So I think we share what we think is cool with other people who we think will think it's cool too. And the simplest illustration for me of that is a joke. Because if I stand up here and tell you a joke, well, you might find it funny, but first of all, I don't know enough about you to know whether you're going to get this joke. I don't know where the boundaries are in telling this joke. But if I have a relationship with you, if I know enough about you to tell you a gag, first of all, the chances are you're going to find it funny because I've already filtered for it. Second of all, you're likely to find it funny and want to pass it on to someone else. You want to share it with someone else, but you will reform it because each time these communities of purpose reform in an ad hoc way. They should move on to the next purpose they want to discuss. Okay, so when you've gone from this room and you want to retell that joke, you'll tell that with another group of people who you know enough about to be able to get away with telling that joke in a particular way. You will have changed it. And they will, if you've done a good job on it, they'll find it funny too. And they'll take that message and shape it and pass it on. So I think users select what they think is cool, has utility to them to take on their journey. So they're reforming into another ad hoc group. And the guy on the edge of the group gets the joke and passes it on. So the participants are adapting the message to suit the group they wish to share it with. And the people best placed to adapt the message are in the group, not on the stage. And so it continues, the message evolves or it dies out. But we share what we think is cool. And that which we are involved in the co-creation of, we embrace. We are more likely to pass on. You will tell the joke because you've made it your own. Okay, so it spreads like this. They aren't your groups, remember that. And they aren't your messages. And marketing is not done to them, it is done by them. Okay, so I was going to talk about the 8th mass media. So first of all, 7 original ones. The first 7 mass medias are print, audio, cinema, radio, TV, internet, and latterly mobile. And I'll be speaking at Oxford University in December about mobile as the 7th mass media. But I'm not going to go into too much detail about why that's different today, except to say that there's a few things that mobile is different from the 6th mass media for, because it's truly personal, it's always on, it's always with you. It has a built-in payment mechanism and it allows creation at a point of inspiration, unless it's an iPhone, which just gets in the way of creation. I shall brief off on that. So what I wanted to do is, we started talking about 7th mass media. A group of us at a tweet up. Everyone use Twitter here? Okay, we've got a few, excellent. So we had a tweet up for lunch one day in town and we're talking about mobile as 7th mass media, and someone said, well, what's the 8th then? And I started thinking about it, and my answer really was that it's we are the 8th mass media. And this is why, because I think the 8th mass media has to be something which connects communities of purpose globally. And it has to do that in real time. And it has to do that beyond all silos. We'll know we're hitting the 8th mass media when we're able to do this. At the moment, language is one of the great silos that we have to overcome. And if you can do all of this, if you can connect people around a shared purpose in real time, then you will enable the fulfillment of Greek's law. Then you'll finally see this exponential growth that seems so bizarre. If you'll double the value of your network if you add one extra node. It seems extraordinary, but if I have a problem to solve right now and I can connect with people globally to solve that problem who also share my purpose in that right now, I think you'll agree it's going to be a really valuable thing. So in the 8th mass media, we know participatory culture is leading us towards that. More people getting involved with doing, creating, sharing of themselves, becoming distribution channels. That's leading us to this place where the 8th mass media will be. And it's not just that we're creating user-generated content. It's not that people are taking the place of professionals for creating that content. I mean that users are now the distribution methods as well. We are how we share things, we're how the joke gets retold. And we are the content, we are the people coming up with the gags. We are the user journey, we are the way in which we choose how we're going to connect and share. And we are the messages that are being transmitted. We are the medium and the media carried by it. And I think you can start understanding Widget's role in this when you consider this as a journey. The spreading of messages is always a journey. So not only are we the nodes that are the connections, we're also how the connections are being made. By the way we share our metadata, if you have this really effective, I think in terms of Twitter, for example, if people know enough about being likely to connect without having to share too much personal data. And we are making those decisions for ourselves daily. We're deciding how the distribution happens in ways the media companies were always in control of and broadcast world. So the eighth mass media is where being pointed at is less important than being taken with. And there's an idea, I think Jeff Jarvis talks about do what you're good at and point to the rest. And I think that's maybe an early 21st century notion, but we're moving towards a world in which do what you're good at and be portable is more important. And widgets are, of course, consummate taken with enablers. So if I create some content or some message or some idea that is portable, it's widgetized, and those are the things that are best at being taken on the journey to people. Just one consideration is that perhaps this isn't the eighth mass media after all, perhaps it's the ninth, because we didn't include at the beginning of those seven that we used to do all this stuff years before the whole mass industrial complex came along. We used to talk to each other in the village setting that Chris was talking about this morning. I think the difference between that first mass media where people used to talk to each other and and what is either the 8th or the 9th, depending on how you count it, is scale. Because now we have a world in which mass collaboration that's made available through the way we choose to connect, through our shared purposes. We can now create organisations of mass collaboration that are larger than any of the biggest hierarchical organisations on Earth. You think of things like Linux, for example, how that's been developed bigger than anything any individual hierarchical organisation could have organised. So I think scale makes a difference. So a few lessons for brands. Well, the first one is, of course, that there's all this conversation happening, there's all this connection happening, there are all these ways in which people are forming happening. And so the first thing to do is to listen, to find out where it's happening and what people are saying about it. And of course the second side of that is to respond. And I think there's an awful lot of good work going on in listening, loads of very measuring stuff going on in listening, but it's all about responding at the end of the day, because just knowing it's going on is not enough. So I think you have to listen for the conversations that are happening with or without your permission. And I discussed this with Chris a little earlier. One good example of that is Cadbury's Gorilla. I don't know how many people are familiar with the Cadbury's Gorilla, drumming Gorilla TV adverts. Well, Cadbury didn't grant permission for people to rehash those TV adverts on YouTube, but there are thousands of them. And so they've taken the idea, they've gone off and done their own thing with it and shared it with their friends. Cadbury did not grant permission for that. And these conversations are happening everywhere that people talk. Well, we're able to track some of it because it happens online, it happens digitally, but actually 70-80% of it is still happening offline, where you never know anything about it. But online you can listen to things like Surmise, which has become Twitter search, brandtags.net. If you haven't checked that out and you fancy getting a snapshot of what your brand looks like in the minds of users, that can be very funny. And Radian 6, I think, is about the best of the measurement tools at the moment for sentiment analysis. So the key thing is to listen, enable and serve. That's because 70% of purchase decisions are friend recommended. And I always wonder whether many companies are actually spending 70% of their marketing, if you like, their advertising spend on this area, because they're not even asked why not. There's 70% of the sales being made this way. I've said earlier, marketing isn't done to them, it's done by them. That's a lot about recommendation. You think a recommendation happens when you recommend something to you, but actually recommendation really happens in the mind of the receiver. And that's always going to be about these people telling jokes to each other. So think less about where the eyeballs are and more about where the mouths and the ears are, where the conversations are happening, and start placing value on real-time human interaction. I'll give you an example of this. Because a little while ago I was looking to buy a car for my wife, and I thought I'll have a play with the vendor relationship mechanism, which is really kind of the opposite of the CRM. And the idea is that I say what I want and the vendors come to me. Well, let's see. So I posted on my blog that I wanted a particular car of a particular type in a particular area. And then I thought, well, let's see who out there has got half-decent RSS feeds, or let's see if anyone's using any of these good listening devices, using their Google readers. Let's see if anyone can find my plea. Rather than me go searching on the internet, let's see if they'll come to me. So what happened was 2 weeks passed by, and actually I had to buy a car at that time, so we'd done the deal and moved on. But 2 weeks passed by, and a comment finally arrives on my blog from a buzz marketer. Someone describing themselves as a youth buzz marketer in the United States for Toyota Yaris, which was the car I was looking to buy. And they just posted, well, I thought you should know, I thought you'd be really pleased to hear that I found your post, but as far as buying a car is concerned, I'm afraid you're on your own there. And I thought this was just a superb example of the listening is being done, but the response is not. It's so easy to, I don't know what a marketer thinks they're doing if they're not selling stuff, but for me this little model just says, if I want to buy something, and do you want to sell something, let's talk. And that involves human beings talking. Okay, well, why are widgets so important all of this? Well, I think it's obviously critical to be portable if you're going to be taken on the user's journey. And in my view, the user is the destination now, not these big websites that you expect people to come and visit. So you've got to go with them, you've got to give them stuff. They're going to take on their journey and start spreading the joke among their friends. And obviously, that means it has to be adaptable. And widgets, the best widgets are adaptable. You can personalise them, you can retell the joke. And adoptable means that I can associate myself with your brand if I choose to, or with your organisation. So, I think there's a good example of a company called is it GoFresh in mobile. They do a neat mobile social network, and on that social network, users create content, of course, but the users get to choose whether an advert is placed on their content or not. That's all. They don't get paid any money, they just get to choose whether an advert is placed on their content, and that sounds wrong. That's all right. But actually it works really well because kids want to be associated with particular brands, and they want to say, this is part of my story, this is what I'm about, and this is part of the badging that we talked about earlier today that widgets can provide for people. They can say, I'm into this, and by displaying some widgets, I'm telling you something about me personally. The low technical barriers thing, I think, is important because it's not only make it easy for people to do stuff, but just make it easy. It's overwhelming how complicated technology can be. I have friends who won't even consider learning how to use a sat-nav because it's an hour of their lives they cannot be bothered with. And I think those of us in technology sometimes kind of fool ourselves that we're making things user-friendly. And actually there's a big leap to be made in making things genuinely user-friendly as people would expect. Try to be as user-friendly as a bicycle, I think, is kind of somewhere to aim for. Widgets are becoming ubiquitous, and that's really, really important. What was it? Google's got 6 billion page views, I think we heard this morning, per month of their widgets, and that's probably low compared to things like Google AdSense or YouTube. Widgets are just becoming something that are part of our everyday lives. And as Clay Shirky says, you know, when the technology becomes boring, then the change can become interesting. And so when we're not really blown away by the fact that we can play with widgets, then it will become really interesting. One thing I want to throw into the mix is, and something I think widgets do quite well, is they enable this behaviour emulation. And I think one of the great promises of digital has been that we think we can understand exactly what people want from learning all their profile information, gathering all this data about them, taking off the top of their heads and going, oh, right, we know exactly what you want, what you're going to do next. Well, the fact is we're post-rational creatures, so we don't actually know what we want or what we're going to do next. We're going to copy the monkey next to us, generally. That's why we're all sitting in lines right now wearing approximately the same kind of clothing. We copy the monkey next to us over and over again. Behaviour emulation is the real way in which behaviour gets changed. And widgets, by simply, if you see, I've got X widget on my blog, and you think that might be interesting, and you think something of me, then you might copy it too. It's a really powerful driver. And widgets do that in ways that most traditional advertising and message communication means cannot capture. I think widgets work at their best when you allow users to adapt them to better suit those they would share them with, just like our joke. And the YouTube one, the gorilla from Cadbury's is a great example of that, because you have no permission at all involved, but people are just taking that and playing with it and passing it on to their friends because they're making it funny to their group of people. They're obviously great when you lower the technical barriers. I mentioned that just now, but a good example of that for me was last Christmas or the one before, I've lost track. Pampers, in the US at least, did this campaign where they played Silent Night and they had pictures of babies sleeping, which was all very lovely. And online you could go and insert images by a really easy drag and drop interface of your own children. And then guess what, you might want to pass that on to Nanny, and you might want to pass it on to Auntie, and they might find the same thing and go, actually, I can put my own kids in, pass it on, etc. Really low technical barrier, particularly with video. Video is nasty, complicated things for most people, but just adding some really simple interaction makes it something that's more likely to pass on. Widgets require this really key one, is that a willingness to relinquish control. So we've got toolkits that users can play with, we can build them till the cows come home, and we've got bags of creative users. But have we got a willingness to relinquish control? I think that's the critical one for anyone wanting that joke to get shared. You've got to let people retell it the way they want to retell it. I do think that going on this journey for any brand, company, organisation, thinking through the processes here and taking part in them is a way in which they can culturally change to fit better the network world that's emerging. So I think listening to and responding to the network requires and drives cultural change within your brand, because it raises and answers questions about ownership and control to make your brand better adapted to the network's world. And in that respect, it's a nice, safe way of having a future. You get to learn on the journey, and you get to change to be the kind of business that people want to interact with along that journey too. I don't know how we're doing for time, Ivan, but I'm nearly wrapped, so it will be a relatively early lunch unless people have a million questions. But I do want to end up with this idea. This slide is, it says future TV will be made with simple equipment, unqualified people, small budgets and bad taste. That sounds to me a great description of YouTube, and it was written by Brian Eno in 1991. And the point of that is that these disruptions take quite a long time to really kick in, to really change the world. And for me, the great disruption of the internet has only just begun. Yeah, I know the internet's been around a while, I know email's been with us a while, but I think all great changes need a usable interface that everyone can get to grips with. This is the idea of ubiquity we talked about earlier. Widgets are getting ubiquitous. When they get everywhere, they change everything. So for me, the internet, its disruption, its group-forming disruption of everything it touches, is only just starting because It's only 3 years plus since YouTube emerged, and think how that has changed television in just 3 years. And for me, social networks are the kind of telephone interface of the internet. They're the thing that once you get a telephone on everyone's desk, the world changes. When there's only a handful of people geeking around those telephones, a lot changes. And for me, social networks are this kind of really easy way in which people can form groups, and a really easy way in which people can understand what group forming does. So you think of Facebook, it really is a primary way in which people form groups. Facebook, and it's campaign by students last year who were paying money, or were expected to pay money to HSBC. If you're not familiar with the example, the HSBC bank were wanting to add another, I think, £140 a user a year for an overdraft facility which had always said was going to be free. And very rapidly a group formed on Facebook to defeat this proposal. You wouldn't think it was a proposal, but it was by the time they finished with it. They understood very quickly that Facebook was a place in which they could organise around a purpose at very low cost. So all these students who were now, these were people who'd left university, could no longer get together physically to organise to make change. They've done it online, done it on the internet. Now this kind of, the social networks that make this group forming phenomena of the internet really clear to people have only really been kicking around for 3-4 years. I think it was 2-3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago at MySpace, 2005, sorry, 3 years. MySpace clocked more page impressions than Google. I think in the last year we've seen a 50% take-up rate of internet users on Facebook among some categories in the States. So we're actually still quite early days with social networks. Not everyone is on them yet. Not everyone has understood how they can group form through them yet. But we're getting close. We're not far away from the point at which everyone, your mother included, will be able to do this stuff. And then that will change everything. That's pretty much all I have to say today. I'm very open to questions. And unless you want to get straight to your lunch, I'll answer a few. No? Yeah. So.
I've heard the notion being used that people don't call it mass media, but my media. Why do you still call it mass media and not
in the same way that I think of mobile as a mass media, none of these, the internet is regarded as a mass media too, but none of them are actually about broadcast. I think the distinction is broadcast. So we got up to the fifth mass media where they were broadcast, and now we're into interactive medias. And the real distinction, I think, of the eighth is simply that we become both the distribution, so we are taking control of broadcasting, if you like, we're broadcasting to each other, and also we are the connections and the way those connections are made. I think is an important distinction. Whether you call it mass, my, we, us, I don't really mind.
Is there going to be a next generation of social networks?
I think there will be something at some point that just makes social networks irrelevant. At the moment, they are a silo in which people can easily connect. So they're this great kind of telephone for us to make the group forming network theory calls. There'll come a point where we don't need them anymore. There'll come a point where simply sharing our metadata somehow will mean we can be picked up by, connect with other people's metadata in real time, so we can connect around the purpose. Then the whole kind of reason for being in social networks disappears quite rapidly, and you just see it as a scrapbook. What that is, I don't know. There's a lot of people working hard on ways in which that might be enabled. I know Microsoft's working on something quite interesting in that space. And I think all of the open social, all of those kind of open API projects are an effort towards it. And it's interesting that language, the silo that was least challenged. The geeks are even getting in on that and doing some on-the-fly translation. And for me to be able to form a round purpose with Chinese people too, it's going to make quite a difference to the pool of knowledge and action that I can access.
So you're using internet as a web. That's the way I understand your part of internet. So what's your comment on Java and Twitter on Navstack Rabbit? Is that like 7.5 media or is it 9 whatever?
But what is Twitter is one I know best, and I've given some time to thinking about. Twitter for me it's group forming with fuzzy-edged groups. And it is getting towards 8 because it takes away a lot of the silo stuff. It means that I don't have to I think Facebook, I guess to MySpace as well, are built around a lot of private data. And so they're fundamentally going to prevent this fuzzy, easy connection with people who don't know you need to know. Whereas things like Twitter, I can get introduced to other people I didn't know I needed to know quite easily through following the conversations and without sharing too much data. So I think Twitter for me is the best example so far, but it's still silo. You've got to be in Twitter to play in this game. Yeah? So you can't, and it gets really confusing when you throw in friend feed, and I don't know where the conversation was meant to start, continue, or be continued. If you can imagine a global hot desk, in the way, if you move around, you talk to people around you, you learn something from them and they learn something from you. If you could do that globally in real time, then you'd be getting where the 8+ media is going to take us. It's beyond the silos. Thanks very much.